There are people who make you feel like everything is your fault, who leave every conversation having gotten exactly what they wanted, who seem charming, intelligent, and magnetic, until you're close enough to see what's underneath. Psychology has a name for the personality structure that makes this possible. It's called the Dark Triad, and understanding it might be one of the most important things you ever learn about human behavior. What the Dark Triad is. The term Dark Triad was first formally introduced in 2002 by psychologists Delroy Paulus and Kevin Williams at the University of British Columbia. They identified 3 personality traits that, while distinct, share one critical common factor: disagreeableness. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and subclinical psychopathy each measure differently and manifest differently, but together they create a profile of a person who consistently prioritizes their own interests at the expense of others, without guilt, without remorse, and often without even awareness that anything is wrong. These are not clinical diagnoses in the traditional sense. They exist on a spectrum, from mild traits that most people exhibit occasionally, to extreme manifestations that define someone's entire way of relating to the world. The 3 traits are narcissism, an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, and a limited capacity for genuine empathy. The narcissist sees themselves as special, as deserving of more than others, and responds to perceived criticism with disproportionate anger or contempt. Machiavellianism, named after the Renaissance political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli, this trait describes a cold, calculating approach to interpersonal relations. The Machiavellian person plans several moves ahead in any social interaction, manipulates strategically, and has no moral objection to deception as long as it serves their goals. Psychopathy. In its subclinical form, not the dramatic Hollywood version, psychopathy is characterized by low empathy, low anxiety, high impulsivity, and a superficial charm that can be extraordinarily convincing in short-term interactions. Subclinical psychopaths were distinguished by notably low neuroticism, meaning they remain calm and unrattled in situations that would distress most people, which makes them appear confident, decisive, and unusually composed under pressure. One of the most important recent advances in understanding the Dark Triad concerns the question of empathy. For years, it was assumed that all 3 Dark Triad traits shared a common feature, a simple lack of empathy, but the science is considerably more nuanced, and understanding the distinction changes everything about how you recognize these personalities in real life. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in Frontiers in Psychiatry in 2025, analyzing 14 studies with a total of 5,328 participants, found important differences in how each Dark Triad trait relates to empathy. Narcissism was negatively associated with affective empathy, the ability to feel what others feel, but showed no significant link to cognitive empathy, the ability to understand what others feel intellectually. Machiavellianism showed significant negative correlations with both cognitive and affective empathy. Psychopathy showed the strongest negative associations across both dimensions. Psychopathy showed the strongest negative associations across both dimensions. What this means in practical terms is striking. The narcissist may genuinely not feel your pain, but they can often understand it intellectually, which is why they can be so effective at saying exactly the right words in the right moment, even when their actions tell a completely different story. The Machiavellian understands your emotions precisely enough to exploit them and feels them just little enough not to be troubled by doing so. The psychopath in the subclinical range may be able to read social situations with extraordinary accuracy, while experiencing almost no emotional resonance with the people in them. Cold minds, dark hearts. How the Dark Triad shows up in everyday life. The Dark Triad isn't only found in criminal profiles or extreme case studies. Research consistently shows that Dark Triad traits are distributed across the general population, appearing in workplaces, romantic relationships, families, and social circles. A comprehensive systematic review published in the International Journal of Consumer Studies in 2025 analyzed 251 articles examining Dark Triad traits in everyday behavior, finding that these personality characteristics function as significant predictors of a wide range of social and interpersonal outcomes, from workplace manipulation to consumer deception. In workplaces, individuals with high Dark Triad scores are significantly more likely to engage in counterproductive work behavior, including taking credit for others' work, strategic self-promotion at colleagues' expense, and calculated impression management with superiors. They are also disproportionately represented in certain high-status roles, not because they are more competent, but because they are less constrained by the social hesitations that hold others back. In romantic relationships, the Dark Triad profile creates a recognizable pattern: intense initial charm and attention, a rapid escalation of intimacy that feels almost too good to be real, followed eventually by a shift in which the partner becomes a source of supply rather than a person to be genuinely cared for. The most important practical question is, how do you recognize it before you're already inside it? Researchers point to several consistent early signals. The person talks about themselves at length but shows minimal genuine interest in your life. They have a history of relationships that ended badly, with themselves always cast as the wronged party. Their behavior in public differs noticeably from their behavior in private with you. They respond to minor criticism or disappointment with a coldness or anger that feels disproportionate to what happened. And perhaps most telling, you frequently feel confused about what actually happened in your interactions with them, as if reality is slightly slippery when they're around. One of the most reassuring findings in recent Dark Triad research concerns how these traits change over time. A study published in 2025, using data from over 5,000 participants aged 22 to 46, collected over 4 years from the German family panel, found a significant downward trend for both Machiavellianism and psychopathy as people aged. Narcissism, however, showed no significant linear change across the same period. This finding has important implications. It suggests that the cold calculation of Machiavellianism and the impulsivity of psychopathy may soften with age and life experience. But narcissism, the grandiosity, the need for admiration, the limited empathy, appears to be more stable across the lifespan, more deeply embedded in the personality structure, and correspondingly harder to change through experience alone. It also means that a young person with high Dark Triad traits is not necessarily condemned to a lifetime of destructive behavior. But it means that without deliberate intervention, narcissistic patterns specifically may persist unchanged for decades. Just when researchers thought they had a complete picture of the Dark Triad, a 2021 study published in Personality and Individual Differences introduced a finding that complicated everything. The study identified a fourth profile: individuals who combined high Dark Triad traits with high empathy. Not low empathy, as the classic model predicted, but genuinely high emotional sensitivity. These individuals, now called dark empaths, were rated by others as significantly more likable, more attractive, and more trustworthy than classic Dark Triad individuals. They used their empathy not as a source of genuine connection, but as a sophisticated instrument of understanding, knowing exactly what you feel, what you need, what you fear, and using all of that knowledge to navigate relationships to their advantage. The dark empath represents perhaps the most advanced expression of Dark Triad psychology. Not the blunt instrument of the classic psychopath, but a finely calibrated social radar, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in understanding. That is extraordinarily difficult to detect until you are already deeply involved. The Dark Triad doesn't exist to give us villains to fear. It exists to give us a map. A map of the psychological patterns that make certain relationships feel confusing, exhausting, and somehow always tilted in one direction. A map that, once you have it, allows you to see clearly what you couldn't see before. Not with judgment, but with clarity. Understanding the Dark Triad doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It means developing the psychological literacy to recognize when a pattern is consistent enough, persistent enough, and harmful enough to require a different response than simply trying harder. Because sometimes, the most important thing psychology can give you is not a technique. It's the ability to see what's actually there. Thank you for watching until the end. Subscribe if you want more psychology videos like this. And let me know in the comments. Have you ever recognized a Dark Triad pattern in someone around you, only after it was too late?